August 15th, the Second World War ended with the surrender of Japan and Korea was liberated. But the joy of liberation didn't last long, as Korea was divided south and north along the 30th parallel by Soviet and US forces. However, conflict continued, and on June 25, 1950, an undeclared war broke out. Seoul collapsed after only 3 days. The defense line crumbled uncontrollably, and the North Korean forces advanced southward at a furious pace, all the way down to Nakdong River. Refugees fled south on foot. It was a fierce procession yearning for survival. Refugees flocked to Busan. But awaiting those who were forced to turn their back on their hometown and converge on the city was a cruel reality forcing them to struggle for survival. After repeated retreats, the government relocated its office to Gyeongsang-namdo on August 18th, and the official residence of the provincial governor was used as the presidential residence. Busan finally began to officially serve as a provisional capital. After being forced south to Nakdong River, the South Korean and UN forces reorganized themselves and launched a counterattack. Thanks to the success of the September 15th Incheon landing operation led by General MacArthur, Seoul was reclaimed on September 28th. The national government returned to Seoul on October 27th, and Busan's first era as provisional capital ended. However, the Chinese Communist forces intervened in the war, and the government was forced to give up Seoul again on January 4th, 1951. As a result, Busan once again became a provisional capital until the government returned to Seoul on August 15, 1953. While the war was taking a toll on the lives of Koreans, the political and economic spheres were tainted with severe chaos and corruption. Shortly before the communist forces recaptured Seoul on January 4, 1951, the government organized a national defense army and withdrew young men to Busan to prevent them from being enlisted in the People's Army. In the process, some commanding officers of the army unlawfully embezzled war supplies, which led to some 50,000 army soldiers who didn't receive those supplies starving or freezing to death or suffering from malnutrition while retreating. The case was brought before the National Assembly, which conducted investigations and court-martialed 5 people, including Commander Yoon Gun Kim and Deputy Commander Lee Hyun Yoon, who were later executed. In June 1952, the Jung-Suk-bol scandal erupted. The Lee administration had sold the dollars acquired by exporting Jung-Suk-bol to local private businesses at a low price and had them import fertilizer and flour, which were then sold to Korean consumers at high prices, or a profit margin of up to 1,000%. Most of the wrongfully obtained profits from such transactions were used as illegal political funds. Although the National Assembly organized a special investigation team and conducted a probe into the issue, all businessmen accused of profiteering were found innocent by the court, and the case evaporated. In 1952, there was an incident that came to be referred to as the Busan political upheaval. President Lee Sung-man proposed a bill to amend the Constitution in favor of a direct presidential election system in an attempt to recapture the reins of power. This was voted down. The National Assembly pursued an amendment to adopt a parliamentary cabinet system, which created extreme confrontation between the Assembly and the President. The government drew major public criticism by forcefully persuading Assembly members who opposed constitutional revision through informal confinement, assault, and other methods. In the end, the government and the National Assembly agreed on a compromise, the selected amendment to the Constitution, which is a combination of the presidential and the cabinet system. Although the government disappointed the public with its political incompetency and corruption, it did attempt to fulfill its role. That role was to conclude a tentative provincial economic agreement with the U.S. in May 1952. At a time when the war couldn't be fought and people's lives couldn't go on without U.S. aid, the economic agreement between Korea and the U.S. helped feed the Korean economy, which was on the verge of starvation. Red Army anti-communist prisoners of war were released from the Kojay POW camp on June 18, 1953. The handling of the Red Army prisoners of war was a key issue between the parties to the armistice agreement prior to its signing. Against this backdrop, the Yi administration pushed forward with a decision to release some 27,000 anti-communist prisoners of war. Though the release disconcerted the U.S., the armistice agreement was finally signed on July 27. The government moved back to Seoul on August 15th, and the National Assembly followed on September 15th. Busan's mission as a provincial capital, full of vicissitudes, came to an end after about 3 years. Busan was the last stronghold of a free democracy. It was a city that overcame the gloomy ordeal and paved the way for national development as North Korea's muzzles crossed Nakdong River and the seeds of a dictatorship were budding. The Provisional Capital Memorial Hall is a place that continues to commemorate Busan's role as a provider of the foundation for today's Korea, the country that was severely destroyed during the Korean War. It was in late June 1950 that unfamiliar faces began to appear more frequently in Busan. People with an unfamiliar accent and bundles on their back converged on the area around Busan Station, and after just a few days, the entire city became crowded with these outsiders. The number of refugees peaked after the January 4th retreat. The massive retreat of January 4th caused the city's population to spike from roughly 470,000 to more than 840,000. Every corner of the city was packed with refugees. Those seeking a way to make a living flocked to refugee camps near Busan port. The Yeongdo and Chogyang camps were completely full. Located far from the pier, Bomildong camp soon closed down. It was replaced by Jokki camp, which was located in a livestock pen that had been used as a cattle inspection facility since the Japanese occupation. Once admitted to a camp, refugees could receive food and even find a job at the pier. While more than 700,000 refugees converged on Busan after the January 4th retreat, only about 70,000 found shelter in refugee camps. The refugee camps were envied by those without a place to stay. More than 40,000 huddled makeshift shacks sprung up, covering even steep mountain slopes. The entire city took on the look of a vast shantytown. If there was a plot of land big enough for a person to stretch out his legs, a tent was surely set up and boards were placed around it. Busan was becoming a somber landscape of refugee shacks. A mother suppressed her hunger as she watched her children share a small bowl of rice she worked hard to earn. To starve children, such a mother was someone who never got hungry. For about 100,000 orphans who lost their parents to the war and had no one to look after them, begging was a means of survival. Give me chocolate. Give me chewing gum. The war forced such children into the grip of a cruel life. In a world without food to eat, the children came out to the street to find nourishment. Their sky blue dreams grew darker and darker, like army suits dyed black. water shortages were another agony for refugees. There were frequently arguments about the one family 3 buckets water supply regulation, as well as the amazing sight of 200 to 300 water buckets lined up tightly in front of a public hydrant, waiting for water even a few hours prior to the scheduled supply time. In addition to the shortage of drinking water, power shortages constrained ordinary households which received electricity for just 2 to 3 hours in summer and 4 hours in winter. As a result, matchboxes and candles became cherished items, and refugees were forced to spend nights in complete darkness in makeshift huts. At around 7:40 p.m. on January 30th, 1953, the largest fire since Korean independence began in Gukje Market in Busan. The fire in Gukje Market not only caused the most damage of any fire since national independence, but also had a significant impact in the economic life of the people of Busan. The fire destroyed 4,260 homes, leaving 22,000 people homeless, and caused as much as 50 billion Korean won in damages. Busan Port was the only entry point for supplies coming into South Korea. The U.S. supplied military goods and materials worth $1.5 million, and they all entered the country through Busan. Port was the only place refugees could rely on. No skill was necessary for a porter, just physical strength. More than 50,000 laborers swarmed the pier and sweated as they carried the loads day and night, and it was still not enough. That was labor at the pier. The labor at the pier was extraordinarily tough. They left their shack in the early dawn when the stars were still bright, carried loads all day long until dusk, and returned home from the pier under the light of the stars. Sometimes, when there was a backlog of cargo, they had to work through the night, carrying loads on their shoulders. Having to withstand the pain of fractured shoulders and deformed bones, that was the labor at the pier. Gukje Market was the heart of the refugee economy. It was full of life. Although it was a period of scarcity when everything was in short supply, there was nothing Gukje Market didn't sell. Demand surpassed supply. Even used clothes could find a buyer. Anything could be sold and turned into money. Hope was growing in the ruins. A school with a view of the sky, a classroom with a sweeping breeze. Children learned from teachers in a school without a roof. They read books and memorized the multiplication tables under the scorching sun, yet they were talking about hope. That hope continued through the turn of the century and eventually built Korea into what it is today. Countless people promised to reunite here on Yeongdo Bridge. They clenched their fists again and walked toward the world. That is how their life lived on.